Hi, and welcome back to Pepper's Pages. Today we're going to be going over my February reads. I decided recently that I wanted to get off TikTok and try YouTube for once, so we're a little behind on the months and everything, but hopefully we can catch up in the following weeks. Here's our first book for February. I Am Legend by Richard Matheson follows the last man in Los Angeles, who also believes he may very well be the last man on Earth. So, most everyone has seen the movie adaptation with Will Smith. It was a great movie. There was really a lot between these two that was not the same, including the character Robert himself, and the way he comes about having his dog, and where he lives at, and most importantly, the villains that he fights. In this book, Robert Neville spends his days fighting vampires, who are all hidden out amongst different houses. And at night, these creatures show up on his lawn, calling for him to come outside, trying to bait him into opening the front door. There are a few things that really stood out to me in this story, and the first one is the loneliness that you can feel while reading this. Robert believes that he is the last person on Earth. He has these vampire creatures coming to his front lawn, coaxing him to come out, and they can all speak. One of them actually knows who he is and calls his name over and over again. But despite these people still being alive, he can't have any human interaction with them without risking his own life. One thing that was really sad to me about this entire theme of loneliness was the particular case with one vampiric female. He struggles the entire story knowing that she is on the other side of this door waiting for him, and he is so starved for human contact that he considers going out to her several times. I personally could not imagine having to live a life of that kind of loneliness, feeling it so deeply in yourself and knowing that you can't escape it. That would absolutely have to be a nightmare. Another thing is his struggle with himself in regards to having to take the lives of these people. He knows that they're infected. He knows that there's probably never going to be a way to cure them, and so he has to take stakes into each home around his neighborhood and take out the ones he knows are infected. There is a specific scene in this book that broke my heart where Robert goes through these homes and takes the lives that he has to take, and he goes straight home and starts drinking. And the whole night he can hear these creatures outside, and it just rips him in half, knowing that this is never going to change for him. He's never going to have any kind of companionship. So he drives himself into really bad self-coping habits. It seems really crazy to me that this book was written in 1954. The story is based in 1976, and despite this time gap between us now and then, it all feels pretty close together. Like, there's not much that would be different now other than the modern technology that we have. It just seems like something that very much could happen. I really enjoyed this short novel. Getting to see the differences between this book and the movie, which I grew up watching and loving, it was just really fun to put those together and say, okay, this is what the movie did better, and this is what was more interesting in the book. I personally enjoyed the movie better. The next book for February is First to Die by James Patterson. This book follows Detective Lindsay Boxer and her friends as they hunt down the honeymoon killer. Through the course of this investigation, Lindsay not only finds out that she has a terminal illness, but she also falls in love. Despite his books being everywhere on the planet, I've never personally picked up a James Patterson book. I'm sort of into mystery thrillers and stories like that, but his seem a little too cheesy for me. When I went to the bookstore and found one in particular that I was really interested in, it was further down the line in the series of the Women's Murder Club, which follows Lindsay Boxer and her friends solving all these different mysteries. As a first impression, I thought this was decent. It was a little bit cheesy, but it got its point across enough for me to be like, okay, yeah, I can read the rest of this. The plot for this was a little bit predictable. I did enjoy the whole manuscript twist and how it all came together to be connected to this one thing. But overall, once you figure it out, you can't unsee it, and you have to go the rest of the book knowing exactly what's happening. Spoilers ahead of time for anybody who might be interested in reading this. What I mean by predictable is if you have the perpetrator in the midst of all these people the entire time, and you know exactly who it is, but once you get down to that final twist, you're like, duh, of course that's who it was. Another thing that bothered me a little bit was how shoehorned Lindsay's sickness felt. You find out that she's got this terminal illness, and you actually feel really bad for her because everything's been going fine for her up until now. She's got this new partner, she's moving up in the detective world, and suddenly to be struck down by this, it's kind of heartbreaking. Then the author decides to take that away for no reason. She's magically healed out of nowhere, and now she gets to enjoy her new love and not think about this illness again. It just felt like it was put in there for cheap sympathy. It made me feel really bad for her, and then all of a sudden she's better, and there's no explanation for it other than she just got better on her own. Her relationship with Rayleigh felt incredibly rushed. We go from both of them playing hard to get. She doesn't want to be in a relationship because of everything that's going on and because of her illness, but he keeps pushing it towards her. So by the time they finally do get together, we're at the end. We're at the very end of the book. She finds out that she's not sick anymore, and she rushes off to tell him, and not long later, he is brutally killed by the honeymoon killer. Are you not going to let me bask in the fact that they're in love and everything is great now? What was the purpose of making them be in love, or having her be sick, if it doesn't even matter in the end? All of this clashing together really felt like I had whiplash. It happens over a matter of pages. You don't really get the chance to celebrate Lindsay and Rayleigh's relationship. You don't get to celebrate Lindsay's recovery from her sickness. You just get tossed into the twist ending and it's over. It's done. Like it doesn't even matter. Overall, this story was pretty cheesy, but it was a good detective story at its core. Everything comes together nicely. The hunt for the killer himself was really nice, but the love story and Lindsay's sickness really just felt out of place. If you're into detective stories, I would recommend this book. If you're starting out in Patterson's series, I would suggest it as well. I have no further experience with any of his other books, and I'm not entirely sure that I will pick up another book. Really just depends. But if you're interested, I definitely think you should check it out. We have finally come to one of my newest favorite books, Jam by Yahtzee Croshaw. Jam follows roommates Tim and Travis as they try to traverse through Brisbane, Australia in its post-apocalyptic form. They're joined by neighbors Angela and Dawn. Tim and Travis are unemployed, while Angela is a student who aspires to be a journalist, and Dawn is a very grumpy game developer. Their biggest enemy, carnivorous strawberry-scented jam. This jam is oozing its way through the streets, eating any organic material it can get its gooey hands on. When I found this book, I had no idea who Ben Croshaw was. I've never touched one of his books before, and hadn't realized that I've actually seen one of his YouTube shows before. His biggest YouTube show is Zero Punctuation, where he critically analyzes video games. For some reason, one of the first things that came to my mind was how close these characters feel to being Nick Frost and Simon Pegg in an Edgar Wright film. Part of me kind of wishes that we could time travel back and have their younger selves play these characters in a movie adaptation. Speaking of movies, the entirety of this book made me reminisce on the 1988 film The Blob. They start off in their apartment, they travel through the town in a yacht, they try to get Dawn's game developing USB drive, I guess it was. Then they end up at a mall that is being run by mall rats dressed in protective trash bags. The leader of these mall rats is named Lord Osimo, And to be completely honest with you, I could not stop picturing Kylo Ren every time he showed up in the book. Along the way, they find a pet tarantula named Mary that gets them into a lot of trouble. And a battle ensues with some rabid business people who live in a building across the way. These people are desperately trying to absorb the supplies and people from the mall to bring them into their own. The tragic reveal in this end really broke my heart. They are so close to getting away from all of this madness and they have no idea. We lose a lot of really important characters throughout this story. A lot of them were my personal favorites. But in the end, everything gets wrapped up nicely. You get a good answer as to why all this happened, which is what makes it so tragic. I really enjoyed this book for how good the writing was, how original the story was told. Everything that happens in it lines up just perfectly. The characters are funny, except for Dawn, who's a total grouch. The characters that they meet up with later, every single one of them brings something to this story that ties it so perfectly together. I don't think that I was disappointed in anything that I read. So the next book for this month is DeadRingers by Christopher Golden. Tess Devlin has always believed that she and her ex Nick have been on good terms until meeting him at a crosswalk where he proceeds to brush her off and completely ignore her. Upset over the way that Nick has treated her, she confides in her best friend Lily, who convinces her to call Nick to make sure that everything's okay. Together, they learn that he is out of town. Soon, Tess and her friends are sent on a wild hunt to figure out where these evil doppelgangers have come from before they can take over their lives. There are so many movies and books with the name DeadRingers. I was really surprised at how original this one felt. In this story, each of the characters make very rational decisions. They try their best to protect each other. Only one of them really has a hard time being convinced that the doppelganger situation is even real. The cause of this entire situation was really neat to me. It honestly reminded me a whole lot of the movie Mirrors with Kiefer Sutherland. The form that the main entity takes in order to haunt them outside of the doppelgangers was really terrifying. He's like this mummified homeless man that ends up chasing them down a road, and that scene was just absolutely terrifying to me. Everyone's scrambling to get back to the house. They're trying to make sure that nobody falls behind, and it was just a really good tense moment. Everything is set up so perfectly throughout this story and comes full circle in the end. The ending disappointed me just slightly. In this, our characters end up at the house that caused this entire mess to happen, and there they find someone that we should have trusted the entire time, who ends up attacking them. This fight was not what disappointed me. It was very tense. It was a great climatic point of the story, and you really are in this, really immersed, hoping that your characters make it out alive. And then the very next scene, you have the demon who has been haunting these people and causing all of these things to happen, and that fight was just, it felt like it was stuck in there just to have a final hurrah, but it really didn't feel that way. It was kind of flat. It wasn't that intense. I feel like it should have ended after the initial fight in this scene. Even though I was a little disappointed with the ending, it's something that can totally be overlooked. The very last page of this book is what tore me in half. I was not expecting this character to have been the doppelganger the entire time. I will not tell you who it is because I loved learning it for myself. It's more or less just a horribly bittersweet ending. I really recommend this book despite the fact that it does follow a lot of the same tropes as other stories that involve doppelgangers. Even though it does follow along with these, it is pretty original to its core, the storyline and the concept and everything behind it. If you're a fan of horror, I really think that you might enjoy this. The last book for February is Annie on My Mind by Nancy Garden. This story follows Liza, a high schooler who aspires to be an architect. One day at a museum, she comes across Annie while she is singing in one of the separated rooms. and their relationship blossoms very quickly. Together, they struggle through high school issues and learning to define the feelings that they have for each other. This was my first LGBTQ book. I'm usually not one to read romance or be very interested in it, but I found this to be an incredibly sweet story. I truly felt bad for these characters and the way that they were treated and the things that they had to go through together. There were a few decisions that they make that were pretty questionable, but I had to continue reminding myself that they are teenagers and they made decisions that were pretty much what a teenager would make. I read this book through Audible, and I'm very glad that I did because there was an interview included with the author, Nancy Garden, and she said a few things that really stuck out to me, and I'm going to talk about one of them. In this interview, she explained that when she was a child, she had no idea what the term gay meant or what it meant to be gay, so she couldn't define that for herself until she was much older. This made Liza not understanding or knowing what her feelings were make sense. While reading this, I assumed that a kid in the 90s would know all about it, but I wasn't around then, so maybe they didn't. I really appreciated how tame the story was. It feels like that there's a lot of YA novels out there right now who try very hard to sexualize teenage relationships, and it gets very uncomfortable. In this story, the worst thing that is described to you is them kissing, and as teenagers it doesn't really matter. Even the scene where they are incredibly intimate, you are given no details of what's happening. You were just told that it happened and then everything falls apart after. I really feel like this story or this type of story is very important for young people trying to find themselves. I highly recommend this book to just about anybody. You don't necessarily have to be the age range that it was looking for because it has a lot of good points in it. It has a lot of good lessons. There are really high points where you're happy for these characters and really low points where you wish that everything could just turn around and be okay for them. So this concludes our February reads. I hope to have the next video for March up next week. If you have any recommendations or questions or anything else that you would really like me to go further into detail about, please let me know because I would be more than happy to go over it for you. Until next time, happy reading!